TCU football starts the season 0-1 after a 45-42 loss to the Colorado Buffaloes. What went wrong for the Horned Frogs on both sides of the football? That, plus a little basketball practice, some recruiting news from hoops and baseball as well. All coming up right now on Frogs Insider. Welcome into the Frogs Insider podcast. I am Jamie Plunkett here along with Melissa Triebwasser. We are part of the Republic of Football Network, the podcasting network for Dave Campbell's Texas football. I am struggling today, Melissa, on this Labor Day Monday. I've edited out most, I think, of the retakes I had to do just for the simple cold open, but here we are. It's good to know, I guess, that I'm in decent company on the struggle bus this weekend because TCU, TCU secondary specifically did not look great on Saturday against Colorado. I know we're going to get into all of that here in just a moment. But
I was going to say, normally you're a pretty effective two-way player, the podcast and the writing. But you're not. This is not really a Travis Hunter performance from the start, JV.
No,
but that's okay.
I've been overshadowed by Travis Hunter, as have so many people on this planet in the last 48 to 72 hours. We'll definitely talk about him. I wrote about him a little bit in my Monday morning quarterback for 24/7 at hornfrogblitz.com. He outshined any expectations I had for him. I think on the show last week, we both acknowledged how good of a player he was and what he was capable of. And he still beat all of those expectations by an impressive amount, over 100 yards receiving on 11 catches. He also had an interception where he completely baited Chandler Morris into throwing a ball to what he thought was a wide open receiver. And he played over 125 snaps, which Sonny Dykes mentioned in his post-game press conference as well. But before we get into any of the details about the secondary or anything like that, Melissa, I just want to hear from you, because you were in Fort Worth this weekend for the game. What was your initial reaction once the game was over on Saturday?
I think the word is probably disappointment, but also resignation. I think it was absolutely a disappointing performance, something that Sonny Dykes also mentioned in the post-game press conference, that, his team played like they thought they were too good to play Colorado, and Colorado played like a team that wanted to play football a lot more. The energy was in stark contrast, which is not surprising in any sense. I mean, Deion Sanders' hype train is real, and he knows how to get those kids fired up, and he was super effective. And from the moment they stepped foot into the tunnel, and even the pregame speech, which we've now kind of seen all over social media, it was clear that this was a team that was excited about the opportunity to prove people wrong. TCU also should have been excited about the opportunity to prove people wrong, coming off of that national championship game, coming off of a preseason which they were picked to finish fifth. And there's a lot of guys filling in for guys that are in the NFL now, on NFL rosters. But that team was disengaged. They did not play with any fire in their bellies. Like, I can give all of the cliches, right? They did not look prepared to play, both on the field, on the sideline, and even acknowledged as much, at the post-game press conference. And then the resignation part of that is every concern that I had going into the season, that I had talked myself out of over the course of fall camp, came to roost in a very real way. That Chandler Morris is the oldest young quarterback in college football. Mm-hmm. He's the least experienced 23-year-old in the game, right? Or 22, however old he is. I have no idea how old he is, but that Quentin Johnston was as special as we thought he was, and that guy does not exist on this team. That replacing a Thorpe Award winner isn't just as easy as putting a guy who's a little bit taller and a little bit bigger and a little bit, more highly touted as a recruit. You can't just stick that guy opposite, in his spot and have everything come together. The secondary was beyond disappointment because of how many guys were returning, but everything else looked like a team that replaced NFL caliber talent at some key positions.
So I want to point out two numbers that stood out to me from this defensive effort on Saturday that I think are really important to understanding.
Maybe effort isn't the word, but okay.
Defensive attempt, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
So the first one is 18. It's the number of missed tackles TCU had on defense on Saturday. You can debate whether they were forced by Colorado or if it was bad form by TCU. I'm going to go ahead and cut the difference and say it was a little bit of both, because Colorado does have excellent skill players on the outside, especially at receiver. That true freshman running back, Dylan Edwards, was also phenomenal. He had 4 touchdowns on the day.
God, he had 4.
He had a rushing touchdown and 3 receiving touchdowns. Colorado had 4 receivers with over 100 yards on the day as well. And the missed tackles were predominantly in the first quarter, but they also set a tone for the day. TCU consistently got to the point of attack well in the first quarter. But then their feet stopped moving and they were trying to grab people with their arms. They weren't finishing tackles. And that allowed Colorado to, on the day, go 9 for 15 on third down, which is just an unbelievable number. At one point, they were 7 of 10 on third down going into the fourth quarter. And they found themselves consistently in good shape on third down. Colorado did 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. And Shedeur Sanders did an excellent job of getting the ball out quickly into the flats, where TCU just seemed
they're in mud.
Not interested in covering. Dylan Edwards had 5 catches on the day, none of which were more than maybe 10 yards downfield. I would say 3 to 4 were either at the line of scrimmage or behind it. And he had 135 yards and 3 touchdowns on the day.
Well,
TCU was just not able to cover the flats. And when they got out to the flats, they missed tackles. And it was just a bad overall tackling performance.
And even when they did create 3rd and long situations, which there were quite a few early, it felt like Shedeur Sanders had no problem picking apart that TCU secondary. And I might have just jumped on what you wanted to talk about, but like that to me was the most frustrating part of these third down performance, is even when it was 3rd and 12, it was no problem for this Colorado offense.
And the next number I want to talk to is the reason that it wasn't a problem is because TCU had just could not get pressure on Shedeur Sanders at all. They had 5 quarterback pressures on the day.
Wow.
5. 3 were sacks, right? Caleb Fox, Paul Oyewale, and Johnny Hodges all recorded sacks for the Frogs on Saturday, but they had 5 quarterback pressures on the day, 7 tackles for loss in all. There was just no movement up front by this 3-man defensive line to get any kind of pressure on Shedeur Sanders. They didn't blitz nearly as much as I thought they would. Last year we talked a lot about how this 3-3-5 stack is really good because you can bring pressure from a lot of different angles and a lot of different places and kind of keep an offensive line and a quarterback off guard. We saw very little of that on Saturday afternoon, especially when TCU would reclaim the lead, which they did multiple times throughout the afternoon, just to give up a touchdown pretty quickly thereafter and lose the lead again. It felt like the defense was dropping 8 a lot and still not covering well. It felt like they weren't trying to get a ton of pressure. They were allowing the defensive line to try and create that pressure, and they just weren't getting it done. And when you combine those two things, not getting pressure on a quarterback, missing tackles when the ball's in skilled players' hands, that's a recipe for disaster. And that's why Colorado had 565 total yards of offense and 45 points against this defense.
Yeah.
And this is becoming a little bit of a concern, because when you date back to the Fiesta Bowl, the second half of the Fiesta Bowl, TCU has allowed 149 points in the last 10 quarters of play. And they don't have a D Winters to bail them out. Like you mentioned, they don't have a Trey Hodges Tomlinson to bail them out. They don't have a Dylan Horton along the defensive line to bail them out. You've got to find some guys who are capable of being, impact players on this side of the ball, or it's going to be a very long season for TCU's defense.
I think that the inability, and this is what I don't understand, is we knew the secondary was going to give up plays, right? Like that's kind of it. You're going to play good quarterbacks, you're going to give up plays, right? But the fact that one thing that we talked about extensively through fall camp was that we knew that the pass rush was going to struggle, especially early, but we thought the secondary could hold up. This secondary could not hold up whatsoever. Josh Newton, who we believe is a potential All-American caliber player and certainly an all-conference caliber player, got cooked. Now, he got cooked by an elite talent in Travis Hunter, who if this kid continues to play, I think we talked about this after the game, at 80% of this level all season, it's going to win the Heisman. I mean, unquestionably will find himself in New York as a finalist. But still, like, it's not like the competition is going to get a lot easier in the conference when you talk about quarterbacks that can hit open receivers and receivers that can get open easily. There's a lot of reason to be concerned if things don't dramatically change from week 1 to week 3.
I agree. I mean, you travel down to Houston in 2 weeks. They won against UTSA to
A
open
good
their
UTSA.
season. And that was a nice game. That was a good defensive effort from both teams. I think Houston ended up winning that game 17-14, something along those lines.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how TCU handles, a hostile environment, first conference game for Houston. There's a lot of emotion on the Houston side of things. And that was something that Sonny Dykes mentioned in postgame was a problem for TCU. And you mentioned it too. This team looked flat early on against Colorado, and it never really improved as far as demeanor went, as far as energy went from the TCU sideline. Meanwhile, Colorado was completely hyped up to play this game.
Yeah.
And I find it difficult to understand how a team can come out flat week 1 against a Power 5 opponent with as much hype around them as Colorado had.
A record crowd.
53,000 plus in the stands. Big noon kickoff in town for the game. Just all of that is a little concerning to me that you couldn't get up for this game, especially after the way the national championship game went. And I saw this clip kind of going around, Melissa. It's this old Mike Leach clip from the locker room against Texas Tech. I think it was after they lost to Baylor. It was the year after Michael Crabtree graduated and they had beaten number 1 ranked Texas in Lubbock and everything like that there. I think they were an 11-win team that year or something. And he said something along the lines, I can't obviously say word for word what he said, but he said something along the lines of, a lot of you guys in this room right now think that the 11 wins last year means something this year. A lot of you think that you had something to do with all of the catches that Michael Crabtree had or all of the passes that Graham Harrell made. And he started listing all of these guys that made that team the year prior an 11-win team. And he goes, all the calls I played are all the plays I called last year are last year. All the plays that anybody in this room made last year are last year. And I wonder if we dismissed the possibility that a lot of the guys that played on this TCU team last year thought that, things would continue to go the way they did last year. Because, TCU won 13 games and we made it to the college football playoff and all this other stuff, when in reality, just like Colorado showed everybody on Saturday, last year has absolutely nothing to do with this year. And so, I think that there's a lot to be concerned about. I think that there's a lot to be disappointed about in this week 1 performance from TCU, but I also think it's really important to understand that this is only week 1, right? And while I obviously was disappointed in the result on Saturday, I found myself appreciative of the way Sonny Dykes spoke in the postgame press conference and his demeanor in that, because he was very clearly agitated by the loss. He was not hesitant to name all of the things that he thought went wrong on Saturday. People by name and by side of the ball. And he took responsibility as well, from a motivation standpoint and from a preparedness standpoint. He says, we weren't prepared. We came out flat and all of that's on me. So he took responsibility. He identified the issues that he saw on the field Saturday. And then he made no doubt about it that they were going to do their best to get that fixed starting on Sunday afternoon. So, they have a game coming up this week in Nichols that will hopefully allow them to get a lot of this stuff sorted out before they travel down to Houston. And I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see for 2 weeks now if this team has really figured out some of the stuff that went wrong on Saturday.
Look, it's just one game. It's not a conference game. It has no bearing on whether or not TCU can have a successful season. At the end of the day, I think we might be looking back and Colorado could well be a bowl team. I mean, they have a tough schedule, but belief is a powerful thing, as we saw a season ago in Fort Worth, right? Belief is a powerful thing. And so I wouldn't put making a bowl game past this program. But I also think we talked about this going into the season, and I think it rings even more true now. Year 2 for Sonny Dykes is critically important foundationally. If you're going to be a flash in a pan and regress from 13 wins to 6, you know, that could be a problem. I don't know that it will be, but it could be a problem. When you, and I know we're going to touch on this a little bit, and that you're written a ton about it this week on Horned Frog Blitz, but when you literally sell out your recruiting seats and you have all those kids visiting TCU and watching Colorado, like it's a big deal, right? And for TCU to capitalize on the positive momentum of a season ago, they have to have a level of success this year that to me is in that kind of like, I think 8 wins is kind of that magic number. 8 wins lets people know that you haven't fallen backwards too much, that yeah, you were replacing a lot, but you haven't regressed. You're continuing to build. And I don't think that I mean, it was a close game. It was an entertaining game. It was a fun game, especially from the offensive side. People from the outside, you know, I had a lot of people apologizing to me. You know, like I was at the airport and I was wearing TCU stuff because win or lose, I'm going to wear TCU stuff. And this guy is like, oh man, like, I'm so sorry about that game. I was rooting for you guys, but wow, what a game, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, listen, like, I saw my team play in the national championship. I saw my team win a Fiesta Bowl. I saw my team play for a Big 12 championship. Like, I'm good. I expected us to take a step back, but like, I'd still like, yeah, it sucks. Like, it sucks. And I'm so sorry that basically what TCU has done is put the prime hype train on overdrive for the next week. And like, we've subjected the rest of college football to nothing but Deion Sanders talk for the next 6 days, right? Like that's kind of the worst part of all of this. And like, he's earned it. Like, by all means, Deion, soak it in. But, you know, it's disappointing, like you said, but there's still a lot of season to play. If they come back and they beat Houston and they beat SMU, everything is back right with the world, right? But I think what the reality is for TCU fans now is that we have to look back and say, Houston's not going to be a gimme, and SMU sure as heck isn't going to be a gimme. And you lose those 2 games, now you're looking at a season that could go completely off the rails before the blink of an eye.
Yeah, and you mentioned the recruits that were there. I mean, TCU had one of the best recruits in the state present for this game on Saturday. D'Alen Evans.
Does he play offense or defense, JB?
He's a defensive lineman.
Oh boy.
D'Alen Evans, who's currently committed to Texas A&M, was on the field, or I guess present for that game on Saturday, along with a handful of other really good 2024 recruits.
Wish they would have suited him up.
A lot of these kids have Colorado offers as well. A lot of these kids, like Evans, are committed other places or are hearing from other places in the state. And this was an opportunity to kind of put your best foot forward on a national stage, and it didn't happen in a lot of ways, which is disappointing for sure. But I want to move to the other side of the ball. Before we do that, though, Melissa, I do want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors here on the show, Hell's Half Acre Sporting Goods. Love our partnership with them. Very thankful for their support of our show. Hell's Half Acre is a brand that was created with Horned Frogs in mind. Each item that they sell, from polos to shirts to hats to hoodies to koozies, all makes a direct impact on TCU student athletes. You can check out all of their gear at hellshalfacresg.com. Like I said, shirts, polos, hats, all kinds of home goods. That Hell's Half Acre has all of the TCU stuff that you need to get you ready for game day. I saw quite a few folks in the stands on Saturday, Melissa, wearing their new football polo, which was pretty cool to see. It's a great shirt, dry fit, which was perfect for the heat out there because it was hot again on Saturday. I know you were down on the field taking photos for the majority of the game, and I saw something around, it got up to close to 130 degrees on the field down there.
Yeah, it felt like
pretty hot stuff.
I'm not going to talk about the places that I was sweating. Like, we're just not. Like, when I got back up to the press box the first time, I was like, oh, this shirt was a lighter purple when the day started.
Yep.
It's gonna leave that
gross.
there. Yeah, you're welcome.
It happens.
It was awful. Like, look, I will say, and that again, that just pissed me off so much that it was miserable on the field. And somehow that became an advantage for the team that plays in one of the most perfect climates in the United States.
Yeah. Sonny Dykes mentioned this too after the game on Saturday. Travis Hunter played over 125 snaps, seemed to have no problem playing that many snaps in this kind of heat and making a difference for his team. Meanwhile, Amani Bailey is the guy that, got called out a little bit in post game because he was cramping up in that last drive and wasn't on the field. And this is kind of where I want to transition into the offensive side of the ball. Amani Bailey had 164 rushing yards on 14 carries for TCU on Saturday, was a difference maker from the jump. And he wasn't available on the final drive, which stalled out near midfield and ultimately lost TCU the football game because he was cramping up. And Sonny had some choice words to say after that, simply that, Travis Hunter didn't seem to have a problem with it, but we had guys cramping up. He said we take a lot of pride in our strength and conditioning and nutrition here, and it let us down today. And that's just an example of how upfront and straightforward Sonny Dykes was in his post-game press conference. He was not letting anyone escape criticism, including himself, for the way that TCU played on Saturday. But offensively, they scored 42 points. The Frogs had over 500 yards of offense. They looked really good at times. And other times stalled out, partially because of Chandler Morris's play, partially because there were some receivers who we expected a lot from who just didn't really show up on the day. Savion Williams comes to mind. He had 2 catches for 6 yards on, I believe it was 6 targets on the day. But let's start with Amani Bailey and the running game, and then we'll kind of move on from there. Melissa Bailey with 164 yards on the ground. Trey Sanders with 3 rushing touchdowns on the day. The running game looked really, really good.
I was really impressed with the work the offensive line did up front and opening up running lanes. And, again, like we have every reason to pile on TCU's defense, but Colorado's defense left a lot to be desired too. The difference was they came up with big game-changing plays, the plays that TCU made a season ago, right? Like that was the difference, is they had the big moments, TCU did not. But I thought the offensive line was really good in the running game. They opened up great holes. Amani Bailey and Trey Sanders both, I thought, had great vision and patience. I mean, Amani obviously is a game breaker with that speed. He did get chased down from behind by Travis Hunter on that 74-yard touchdown or a 74-yard run that ultimately led to a red zone interception. That was the same drive that Hunter had the pick, right? I think so. So that's a big moment in that game for Hunter, who at 125 plus snaps, chasing a guy down on a 74-yard run is again, that dude's special. Sucks. I hate him, but it's pretty cool to watch that in person, to be honest.
Future Dallas Cowboy Travis.
Yeah.
It's destiny at this point, right? Dion is his mentor. It's destiny.
That could also make him a 49er or a Falcon though. So yeah, it's just
Dallas Cowboy.
But Trey Sanders, it was, I think the biggest is, other than the loss, the biggest disappointment for me was that Trey Sanders did not get more spotlight for scoring 3 touchdowns, matching his career total, coming back from those injuries. Him in the red zone, awesome, outstanding, love it, want to see more. Red zone, short yardage, I thought he was a great weapon for the Horned Frogs. Not the guy that you want in the backfield on the final drive of the game, because he doesn't have that game-breaking ability. But I think that used correctly, he has a chance. We talked about him as the guy that could lead TCU in touchdowns, right? And I think he's off to a great start with that. And I think in short yardage, he's a really great guy to have on the field, because he's always going to get you 2 or 3 yards. So now, can the TCU offense get you 2 or 3 yards? That's something we have yet to know, but some concerning. It's also a little bit concerning. Like, they did run the ball a ton, but situationally choosing to pass. I mean, I was having like New England Patriots, Seattle Seahawks flashback vibes a couple of times, where it's like, man, like, you're running the ball down Colorado's throat. Don't try to get too cute with it. And then on the other side of that, when you have an opportunity to be creative, where was that creativity that we were promised to see all fall camp?
Yeah, you mentioned it already, Amani Bailey with the 74-yard run that got them down to the Colorado 23, roughly. I mean, that brought them out of the shadow of their own end zone. It was a huge run for him. TCU ran the ball the next 2 plays for 9 yards to get to 3rd and 1, and they chose not to continue running the ball, which had just gained them 80 yards of offense in 3 plays. On 3rd and 1, they decided to go with a little bit of a wheel route to Major Everhart out of the backfield. And this is the play where Travis Hunter, simply because of his elite athleticism, was able to back off of the route, make Chandler Morris think that it was an open player, which most of the time that route in that situation is going to be pretty significantly open. And then he jumped it at the last moment and intercepted the football pretty much right at the goal line to give Colorado the ball. And that prevented TCU from taking the lead in that moment, which was a pretty big turning point for that game for Colorado in their favor. You're right. And so this was a back and forth affair, especially in the second half when TCU's offense did start to click a little bit better. Unfortunately, Colorado's offense also started to click a lot better. Shedeur Sanders, I believe, had 300 passing yards in the second half alone. And just was putting the ball wherever he wanted to, regardless of coverage, right? There were definitely some moments where TCU secondary completely broke coverage. Guys open out in the flats. Bud Clark was bamboozled at one point. There was he lost track of his guy over the middle of the field and was probably 15 to 20 yards away from him when he caught a pass in the end zone. But there were other moments where the Frogs were in a good spot. Avery Helm and Josh Newton were both in good coverage at times. Shedeur Sanders just made a better throw and the receiver made a better play. There was not a single 50-50 ball that went in TCU's favor. From a secondary to Colorado's wide receiver standpoint on Saturday. Colorado was very good with the 50-50 balls. TCU simply was not. But back to the offense, I think outside of the run game, we saw a Chandler Morris who at times looked really rattled. At times, I think tried to do a little bit too much. One of the plays that stands out to me was actually in the first half where he rolls out to his right. He probably has 7-8 yards on the ground to put him in a second and short situation. And instead he gets to the line of scrimmage and he forces the throw into double coverage that becomes an incompletion. That happened a couple times on Saturday. And you have to ask the question, okay, yes, he's got a lot of practice experience. Yes, he's an older kid for being only qualified as a sophomore. He's the son of a coach. At some point, though, game experience has to teach you what you can and can't do. And so we saw this a little bit from Chandler 2 years ago. We saw it a little bit in the first half against Colorado last year, where it seems like at times he's not getting through his reads quickly enough, which led to an interception on Saturday when he had Jared Wiley open in the end zone, but didn't get the ball to him in time, and the safety drifted over and picked it off. And at other times, he's trying to be the hero when he just needs to be the quarterback. And I don't know what the threshold for experience is for him to kind of work those traits out of his system. Because if that doesn't happen, then TCU is going to continue to be inconsistent on offense. Now, offense isn't the reason that they lost the game on Saturday, at least in my opinion. And that's in spite of the fact that Chandler threw 2 interceptions in the red zone and Griffin Kell missed a 42-yard field goal. Losing by 3 points and having those things happen, you can obviously point to that and say, well, if they had converted at least 9 points on those 3 possessions, things might have gone differently. But with as bad as the defense was, that was kind of the clear reason for why TCU lost this football game. When you think about Chandler Morris's performance, though, Melissa, what am I missing as far as that evaluation goes?
I mean, I think you're right on. And I think there are some concerns. I'm looking at some of the advanced stats here. Look at me pretending to be Parker. He was kept clean on 76% of his dropbacks. He had a clean, workable pocket on 3 out of every 4 times he dropped back. They did a good job of keeping him out of pressure situations. So 16 of his attempts came from a clean pocket. He completed 11 of those for 102 yards. He only went play action 33% of the time. Just 7 of his passes were on play action. A third of his passes were screen attempts as well. So he had 7 play action attempts. He had 7 screen attempts, which I thought was interesting. Depth of target, the majority of his targets were under 10 yards. So 40% of the targets came under 10 yards. They only took deep shots twice of 20 plus yards, which I thought was interesting as well. Chandler was good in the middle of the field. He only had of his targets in the middle of the field, between the numbers, he was 6 for 6 on those short targets, 6 for 8 on the intermediate, 1 for 4, 15 yards and below. He had 2 outside targets, more than 20 yards. Both of those were incompletions. So they were very clearly working the middle of the field. I mean, that seemed to be where almost every passing attempt went, except for those deep targets outside. And he was effective in there. But at the same time, when you are really just focusing on putting the ball in one spot, the defense can really adjust and kind of suck into that. And I would have liked to have seen them get to the edge, use some of the speed and athleticism that we've been promised, that we've seen showcased, and make stretch the defense out a little bit. Like there was nothing that was moving the defender's eyes. There was very little pre-snap motion. There wasn't a lot of things happening before the snap that made the defense make a tough decision. And so the defenders were able to just kind of pin their ears back and play. Like you said, they were winning those 50-50 balls on that side of the ball as well. TCU's receivers just didn't make big plays. They tended to complete the play when it was presented to them, but they weren't going out and making the defense really work to get stops. I don't want to rip into Savion Williams too much here, but if you're going to be the alpha, you got to do more than just talk like the alpha. And I will tell you from field perspective, as we move into kind of talking about the wide receivers, there was a lot of talking. There was a lot of pushing and shoving after the play on plays that he wasn't making a play on. And that to me was one of the biggest disappointments is that is your longest tenured, among your longest tenured Horned Frogs. I mean, he's a 5th-year senior, correct? Like
he's a senior. Yeah.
He's a 4th-year senior. So he's a guy that's been here for a long time. And I did not see the on-field leadership in a way that had and you don't have to be the best player, but you got to be the guy playing the hardest and playing the smartest. And that's not what I saw out of Savion Williams on Saturday. And that was among the biggest disappointments for me on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah. Dalen Wright and Warren Thompson both looked better than Savion on Saturday. I mean, Warren Thompson only had 1 catch for 18 yards, but it was a really impressive catch where
he was wide open like 3 other times.
Yes. Chandler missed him a couple of times downfield. But the catch he did make was a contested ball where he found some separation late in his route and managed to get out and use his hands to bring the ball in. It was a great catch. Dalen Wright had a couple really good catches, including a touchdown on the day from about 23 yards out, where he caught the ball over the middle on 3rd and 9, and then just kind of looked around and realized that he was completely wide open and just kind of jogged into the end zone from there. So there was a lot to like about what TCU did offensively on Saturday. And I think that with more time in this system and with a better understanding now that they've got a game under their belt of who's going to show up on game day and who they can expect good things from. I mean, JP Richardson and Jared Wiley were as advertised.
I was reading 2022 stats.
Oh, that's all right.
Let's go back to the tee it up like you just, man, we were both screwing this up.
Okay.
We'll just go back to what I missed from Chandler Morris. Okay. So looking at, I think that you nailed kind of Chandler Morris. Like, it's hard to blame the offense. Like I said, it's not the offense's fault that TCU lost, but I still think that there were a lot of things left to be desired on the offensive side of the ball, as far as having a rhythm and getting the defense having to make decisions and think in a way that the creativity that we were promised. But if you look at Chandler's day overall, really, really heavy in the middle of the field. He was effective in the middle of the field. He had a pretty decent completion percentage, but again, you're only looking at, like you talked about how Colorado really exposed the TCU defense in the flats. TCU did not, I don't think, use the flats as a sideline enough on Saturday. The majority of his pass attempts were into the middle of the field. Most of them were, on shorter targets. They did attempt 6 balls of over 20 yards, but they only had 1 completion of that. Most of the completions, 12 out of his 17 completions, 12 completions and 17 attempts came on short routes, 0 to 9 yards. So, which again tells me that that's where he was most comfortable. He had 8 completions and 9 attempts behind the line of scrimmage. 9 attempts behind the line of scrimmage seems to be a little egregious in that situation. The offensive line did a pretty good job of keeping him clean. He was clean on 68% of his dropbacks. So on 32 attempts, 29 of those ended up being passing plays. He only completed 19 of those. And he was not blitzed 72% of the time. So Colorado was just able to sit back and just kind of wait on Chandler to not make a play. It's kind of what that gives me the vibe of. Is I don't think that they had a lot of concern that he was going to torch them with his feet, which you mentioned that there were opportunities for him to run and he didn't. I think we all talked about that after the game. Was we understand we want to keep the guy healthy, but at the same time, Colorado was giving him running lanes as he was not taking them. And they also did not feel like that they had to add pressure or blitz in order to keep TCU's offense from matriculating down the field effectively. So the 2 red zone interceptions are absolutely killer, obviously, but at the same time, I think that there were a lot of plays left on the field that could have captured momentum or putting TCU in a position to make Colorado play catch up, because they weren't ever playing catch up. They were either in the lead or within 1 score the entirety of the game. And so it was TCU that was kind of could not get the stop at the end, but then also had plenty of time to get a game-winning drive and could not execute that either, because again, just missed reads, missed opportunities, guys open down the field that would have been maybe a second or third read that he never got his eyes shifted to. And then there wasn't anything in the pre-snap that made the Colorado defense think. There was not a ton of motion. There was not a lot of movement. There wasn't anything outside of the ordinary. It was just kind of lining up and playing offense, which can be really fine and really effective when you have a unit on the same page, but this was not a unit that was executing at a super high level throughout the majority of the game, despite the fact they put up over 500 yards of offense and 42 points.
Which means, at least that's the signal to me, that there's a lot that this offense can build upon after week 1, because there were some really good things. I was very impressed with Jared Wiley and JP Richardson in this game, both of whom had 6 catches. Jared had a phenomenal catch in the end zone for a touchdown on a pass that was a little up above his head, and he managed to go up and make a really good play on it. And, I liked what I saw from Warren Thompson and Dalen Wright as well. Dalen, obviously, with 2 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown. Warren Thompson just with 1 catch, but he was able to find his way open a couple of other times and was just kind of missed downfield by Chandler Morris. Just either he didn't see him or he had already made another read and gone in a different direction with the ball. But that's definitely something that they'll talk about when they look at film from this game is, hey, there were opportunities to find more open wide receivers. But like you mentioned, Chandler seemed to at times kind of lock in on a receiver and force the ball into double coverage, or he locked in for too long on one guy and then was late getting his reads out. And that's what led to one of his other interceptions as well. And so there's a lot to build on from this offense, but there are definitely things to critique as you move forward. But the reality, Melissa, is that right now this team is 0-1, but they've got a really good opportunity on Saturday to get to 1-1. They're playing an FCS opponent in Nichols, and to start to work out some of the things that were really an issue on Saturday against Colorado. This is the perfect opportunity to get back to work and to start to fix all of the issues that we saw.
Yeah, and the talent is still there. I mean, you mentioned JP Richardson, Jared Wiley, both had great games. Jack Besh, I think, is a great matchup problem for an opposing defense. Like, that's a great tool for Kendall Briles in this offense to be able to deploy. He had a great game as well. Didn't put up huge stats, but if you can match him up against a safety, it's really, really hard for a safety to defend a guy with that size and that speed. So the tools are there. I would hope they'd open up the playbook a little bit more, even against Nichols, because you've got to develop some rhythm. And I want to see some of that creativity we were promised. I think one area of concern is who is the leader on this offense. We saw Savion Williams do a lot of talking on Saturday, and he was involved in a lot of the kind of post play scuffles, but didn't make the plays, right? Like, that's supposed to be your alpha on the wide receiving unit. And I think that he did not take hold of that role. And it's something that he's had the opportunity to take hold of for the last 3 years and hasn't done. But we thought with Quentin Johnston and Tay and Darius, off to the NFL, that he would be the natural next guy to step up. He's got some work to do, I think, to earn that role. Jared Wiley, I think, was great, as you mentioned, both as a leader and an emotional leader. But the rest of this offense just kind of went through the motions, it felt like. And while they did score, while they did move the ball, they didn't play with a lot of fire, just like the defense did. And when they had an opportunity a couple of times to make big plays, to put the game away, to steal momentum back from the Buffaloes, they were unable to kind of execute in that big play scenario and make those kind of step on your neck kind of plays that we saw this TCU offense do time and time again a season ago. But as you mentioned, it's a completely different season. These are completely different players. And, it's hard to overstate how impactful a guy like Max Duggan, a guy like Tay Barber can be on a field and in a locker room.
And I wrote about this immediately following Saturday's loss. I'm really curious to see how the wide receivers shake out in the end, because it seems like there are a lot of guys who have the ability to contribute to an offense. But like you mentioned, at some point you have to figure out a hierarchy. And the only way that you can really do that is when a guy goes out and establishes himself as that top dog. Quentin Johnston did that with ease while he was here. Jalen Reagor did that as well. Josh Doxson did that, right? Like, we've seen what a true wide receiver one looks like time and time again in this offense. And at least on Saturday, the closest thing to a wide receiver one was probably JP Richardson.
Yeah.
And he's a great receiver, and we both picked him to lead the team in receptions this season. So the fact that he had 6 for 63 doesn't really surprise me at all. And he had 9 targets on the day too. So that's helpful. But I mean, we're talking about a slot receiver versus a big outside wide receiver who can go down the field and make big plays, who can go up for those 50-50 balls and really be not only a deep threat, but a dominant big receiver who attracts a lot of attention from opposing defenses. There's a big difference in the influence that a big outside receiver has versus a guy who's really effective in the slot. And if TCU's lacking that outside receiver, it's going to be a struggle sometimes for this team in the passing game.
Well, I think the thing we know about JP is I think he's going to have 6 for 60 to 80 yards pretty much every week, but that's not going to win you a lot of football games. Like, you need the he's the Tay Barber, right? Like, he's going to make big plays, but he's not the game breaker. He's not the guy that's going to get that 60-yard touchdown that's going to get the momentum and get things rolling. He's not the guy that you can throw a 20-yard fly route to on 1st and 10 when you're, on your own 15. Like, you need that guy as well, because that's what opens it up for the middle. And I love the slot receivers TCU has. I love the way that they are using the tight end, Jared Wiley specifically. But if you don't get that game breaker on the outside, it's going to be a long season for the Horned Frogs offense. They still might put up 30 points a game pretty regularly, but with this defense, 30 points a game probably isn't getting it done very often.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. It's definitely going to be a challenge. And, again, like we said earlier in the show, this is just the first game. And so there's a lot of opportunity left for TCU to make some improvements on what was, overall a disappointing start, but not a completely hopeless and lost start, in my opinion. There were some positive things on both sides of the ball. Like you mentioned, the offensive line looked really good. I thought Nnamdi Obiezor had a pretty good game one as a linebacker as well. A lot to learn there. And, there's some critiques of the linebacking unit, I think, that we can get into in a future episode if we see some things continue. But there are some building blocks here for TCU to still have a decent to really good season. And it all starts, I think, with the energy that they bring to the practice fields this week, and the understanding that last year has no bearing on this year.
Well, and I think one other thing that we have to keep in mind when we evaluate the offense is this is one of probably the 2 or 3 worst defenses that TCU is going to play all season too. Because as much as Colorado turned things around in a season, that defense still is not very good. But I mean, they were good enough, right? But good enough just meant they had to hold a team to 42. So but I think you're right. I think we've got a lot of evaluating to do. September is going to be a long month. Nichols again should be a get right game, but then you look at Houston and SMU and all of a sudden your feet are right back to the fire. So it's all going to going to be determined on the practice field. And this team came out one of two ways on Sunday. They either came out pissed off and fired up and wanting to hit each other, or they came out and didn't. And so we'll find out, we'll start to see a little bit of it Saturday night, which way they came out. I think we'll know for sure when they travel to Houston, what's actually going to happen. Speaking of travel, you ready for this one? Are you ready for this segue? Speaking of travel, Home Field Apparel can help you time travel back some of your favorite TCU logos throughout the decades, from some of the creepiest and weirdest frogs that you've ever seen in the most delightful way. The sweater frog with the pennant is one of my absolute favorites. Home Field Apparel makes some of the coolest and most fun TCU and other collegiate apparel around. They also make some of the softest hoodies. You are wearing your Big Sky hoodie, which you love to brag on. It is a delightful, delightful hoodie.
So comfortable.
So comfortable. Hoodies, quarter zips, joggers, t-shirts, of course, bomber jackets. I can't wait for my TCU bomber jacket to arrive. And not just for TCU, but for a lot of your favorite Big 12 and other universities across the United States. We appreciate Home Field Apparel being a sponsor of not just the Frogs Insider podcast, but many of the podcasts and all of the podcasts on the Republic of Football Network as part of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Podcast Network. And we love that they not only support us, but they allow us to get you guys a discount on some of their great apparel. So if you use the code FROGSIN15, FROGSIN15, you will get 15% off of your first purchase with Home Field Apparel and 10% off any subsequent purchases with the good brand. So thank you, Home Field Apparel, for being a sponsor and for really just having absolute no respect for my bottom line in my checkbook or my overall financial health and well-being, because every time you release something new TCU, I'm compelled to buy it. And because their quality is good, their products aren't cheap, but they are well worth it.
They see everybody else's bank accounts and they say, we want those to be our bank account.
No. Yes. And we give them to them.
I'm willing to turn over a good chunk of change for stuff like this hoodie, because it's incredibly comfortable. Melissa, let's move on from football, though. We've touched on, I think, enough of what went wrong on Saturday and talked a little bit about the positives, but we also had an opportunity on Saturday morning before the football game to go and take in a TCU basketball practice. It was alumni weekend for the basketball team. They had their annual alumni event on Friday night out at Joe T. Garcia's. Over 100 former basketball players were in attendance, I was told, which is just really, really cool to see. Cool. All of these former players coming back and supporting the current team. They were pretty much all at practice on Saturday morning as well, which made it a fun atmosphere, taking in the Frogs playing a little bit of 5-on-5, doing some other work, rebounding and fast break drills and defensive drills and all this other kind of stuff.
We won't talk about the shooting drills. We won't talk about those.
Maybe not. Well, we can talk about one guy who I think is your favorite player all of a sudden, but there were also some recruits on campus who took in practice. I had a chance to chat with them. All that stuff's going to be up on hornfrogblitz.com this week. But Melissa, you have a new favorite basketball player. It seems you were pretty giddy when you saw Trey Tennyson just stop in transition and drill a couple threes in a row.
I obviously love Desmond Bane and love him as a shooter. And he is one of, if not my all-time favorite TCU basketball player and one of my all-time favorite TCU athletes. But everybody knows Desmond Bane's shot form is broke. It works for him. It's great. It is funky. The basketball coach at B loves nothing more than a shooter who looks like a shooter and then finishes a shot. And oh my God, Trey Tennyson, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen on a TCU basketball court. It is a picture perfect release. I mean, when you talk about beef, right? Balance, elbow, eyes, follow through, like the stuff I've been teaching since I was 16 years old to kids. He is the picture of perfection when it comes to shot form. I mean, that thing gets up in the pocket. Like the release is perfect. It's so quick. Yeah, I'm in love. Not like in that way, because obviously I'm a very old woman, but I'm in love. I'm obsessed. I'm so excited to watch this kid play. So fired up about just watching that team play on Saturday morning, period. everything that we talked about TCU football not having on the sidelines, TCU basketball had in practice. There was emotion, there was energy, there's a real camaraderie around that group. They give each other so much crap, like in the best possible way. They are talking to each other up and down the floor. There's a lot of bragging rights in practice. They've been playing together. You and I talked about this during practice, that this is a team that's had to play against each other for so long because of that international trip, but they seem to really enjoy practice. They enjoyed being out there, and this team is big. They're athletic. There's still some shooting concerns outside of Trey Tennyson. Like, that's still, like, watching the uncontested 3-point drill, I was like, we still have some work to do in that area, but I think they look a lot better than they did a season ago. And Chuck wasn't out there on Saturday, so
True.
that impacts things too. But when you look at how fast the pace of play, how interchangeable some of these parts are, there's a lot to be excited about for TCU basketball this season. I loved seeing the way that Jameer Nelson Jr. ran that team on offense. Avery Anderson looks like he can do so many things well, and then Emmanuel Miller it just was awesome. The other guy, I think you have a favorite player on this team that I had not gotten to see in person yet, because he's a true freshman. And oh my God, I have not seen a true freshman like this at TCU in basketball, maybe ever.
So I've talked a couple times on the show about what TCU basketball was going to end up doing with their 13th scholarship, because they had a couple guys in the portal that they were chasing. They were looking for a fourth guard to pair with Jameer Nelson, Tennyson, and Avery Anderson. There were some thoughts that maybe Tyler Lundblade would end up getting that 13th scholarship. He was a walk-on for TCU last year after transferring in from SMU. But Jace Posey is a guy who I am fairly convinced is working his way into minutes for this team this year. And he put a lot of his athleticism on display Saturday. There were two plays that I think stood out to both of us. The first one was his ball in hand at the top of the key. He moves around a defender, works off of a screen, and then just like that, he's at the rim. Yeah. He's got a bucket. He draws the foul. He hits I don't think he made the free throw. We talked about maybe the free throws he's gonna grow in that area. But his athleticism, his ability to get to the rim was really impressive against, I believe it was Avery Anderson, who was brought in for his defense, right? And so this is a guy who prides himself on being a great defender, and Posey took him to the rim and got a bucket and a foul. On the other side, I believe he got up and he rejected Avery Anderson. And it was not just your average, a guard got a blocked shot. Wow, that's impressive. This was a rim running kind of play where Anderson leapt up, got the ball up, and then Posey came out of nowhere to swat this ball off the backboard. Got a huge kind of whoop from the folks that were in the building watching practice. The team that was on, like, guys that were on the sideline for the drill were hyped for Posey, and running their mouth at Anderson a little bit as well afterwards. And so this is a kid who I think has the coaches wondering how they can get him some minutes, especially early in the season in non-conference, to see what he's got when he's on the court in college against another team.
What wasn't he the one I can't remember if it was him or it might have been Jameer that put E-Man on the floor with a crossover too. I can't remember who it was. But
it was Posey. It was Posey.
Yeah. And he put him on the ground.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isaiah Manning had a moment too where his hands touched the ground, and that he got some grief from his teammates for that as well. I think Nelson was the one who crossed him up. But look, we're coming off of a TCU football fall camp, Melissa, where I think overestimated some things about this team because of what we saw in fall camp. And so I'm trying to be more reserved, trying to temper expectations now on the heels of that with what TCU basketball is probably capable of this season. There's no doubt that, the Big 12 gets stronger this year with Houston coming into the league. And Cincinnati has a history of being a really good basketball program, even though they've been down the last couple of years. And so this is going to be arguably the biggest gauntlet for any TCU program in conference play this year. And so no game is guaranteed. This team has to stay healthy. Like you said, they've still got to figure out how to stretch the floor a little bit and hit some outside shots. But I have been very impressed so far with the physicality of this team defensively and rebounding, which has become a staple under Jamie Dixon that they kind of got away from last year. So it's good to see them maybe returning to that a little bit this year. And with the athleticism of the guards, I think that this has the opportunity to be a more varied offense than we've seen the last couple of years, where at times it felt a lot like, oh, okay, the offense this time down is going to be Mike Miles, go get us a bucket.
Yeah.
Or Damian Ball, go get us a bucket. I think there are more opportunities for different guys to get involved in the offense this year. We haven't even mentioned Micah Peavy yet.
Yeah, God, he looked
who looks really,
imposing.
really good. It looks like he has improved again off of what was an improvement offensively last year. So how that all bears out on the court, we're yet to see it. We saw it a little bit on the Europe trip, but that was against competition that was far lesser than what they're going to be seeing even in non-conference play. So I'm excited to see what this team has when they get out on the court, and excited to see how they continue to build this offseason.
I'll say it this way. I think that this TCU team has a chance to be really, really good, and I'll still be ecstatic if they go 500 in Big 12 play.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think that this is a team that, and again, because of the scheduling, that 500 mark has got to be kind of the bench water mark for this squad. If they go 500 in conference play, they're definitely an NCAA team, like no question in my mind. They could probably even go a game under 500 and still make the tournament, right? But that's where they need to be. The talent is there. The half court offense is always going to concern me under Jamie Dixon based on what we've seen with recruiting, but defensively, the length, the ability to play in transition. We haven't even talked about what they did at the center position. You're not going to have to see Jacoby Coles and Xavier Cork play a lot of center this year with Mustafa and Uday. Like, both of those guys, just big athletic guys that can, semi-consistently hit the 12-footer, which is all you really need them to be able to do, but just aggressive on the rebounding. This has a chance to be a very complete basketball team, but it's still every single day is going to be a grind once you get to conference play. And so they've got to fatten up in the preseason. And then they've just got to aim for, 500 basketball once they get into league play. I think that would be a huge victory for this group. But the thing I will say is, if this team gets to the tournament, this is a team that could be a Sweet 16 team. They have the pieces to win games in the postseason. And that's really what's been missing, the last couple of years under Jamie Dixon, based on what they've been able to compile as a roster.
Yeah. I mean, we saw last year they got hot from three at the right time. Coles and Chuck started hitting threes to go with what Mike and Damian Ball kind of contributed from the perimeter. What they were lacking was Eddie Lampkin, right? Yeah. When Lampkin left the program, he left a 7-foot void in the center of that offense that Gonzaga was capable of taking advantage of. Arizona State in the first round was pretty capable of taking advantage of that as well. But the Frogs managed to get a bucket late from Jacoby to steal that game. As long as guys stay healthy, interior defense won't be nearly as big of a question mark this year as it was last year.
Yeah.
Now, how do we figure out what a rotation looks like between some of these guys? How consistent can Uday play? Because he's going to get a ton more minutes than he's ever gotten in college. Mustafa was a 30-game starter for Coastal Carolina last year. What does his role look like compared to Uday's? There's a lot to sort out for this coaching staff, but it feels like at this point, the things that they are sorting out are to the positive, rather than, oh my gosh, we have to find a way to fill this hole over here, or account for this weakness over here. It feels more like, hey, how are we going to make sure that all of our strengths get their shine?
Yeah, it's going to be, I think they're going to be a lot of fun to watch. They'll be entertaining, and hopefully not quite as frustrating as this team was, as they don't, like, as far as the injuries and trying to figure out what could work. There's a lot, it seems like there's a lot of leadership on this group too. You can tell Jamie Dixon was really enjoying coaching this group of guys. Getting Emmanuel Miller back cannot be overstated, how important that is, not just for on the court, but when you talk about how to build a team the right way, like, that's the guy you wanted the centerpiece of it, from just a basketball standpoint, but also just from a person kind of standpoint. I know we both think just super, super highly of that kid, and I'm excited to see what he does this year.
Absolutely. Very excited to see what E-Man does. He's got to take a big step forward, right? We've talked a little bit this offseason about where the areas are for improvement in his game, and he's got to take that big step forward if he wants to accomplish some of the things he's setting out to accomplish this year. Is he capable of doing that? Absolutely. Does he have the supporting cast around him to empower him to do some of that stuff? Yeah, I think he definitely does. It's a matter of putting your head down and getting back to work for another year of college basketball. to have a shot at doing what you want to do in the future. So,
Yeah.
Holding out hope for E-Man that he's going to achieve what he got to see his little brother do this past offseason, which he and I had a chance to chat about earlier this summer. And he was just so excited for Leonard to get drafted and to hear his name called that day and to walk up on that stage and throw the hat on and shake the commissioner's hand and do all the kind of stuff that you get to do. It was a cool big brother moment, I think, for Emmanuel Miller. And now he wants it. Now he got there, he watched the draft happen, and now his goal is for that to be him next year. So hopefully big things ahead for E-Man. But Melissa, as we kind of wrap up, I just want to make a quick note about baseball, because they did have a big weekend as well. They hosted 19 recruits on campus this weekend, a good handful who are already committed for the 2025 class. But some big name kids in the 24 and 25 classes that are uncommitted who made their way to Fort Worth, caught a TCU practice, got a campus tour, met with the coaches, and then took in that TCU Colorado football game on Saturday. I had a chance to talk to a good number of those kids to check in about how their weekends went. All that content will be up at hornfrogblitz.com here in the coming days. So keep an eye out for all of that. Melissa, I know you've got a ton of stuff going on over at Frogs Insider Patreon as well. Patreon.com/Frogs Insider.
Yeah, we're back up and rolling. I'm writing again. So pretty excited about having that going, have my little Monday morning quarterback up today as well, and we'll be continuing to write. I'll have some thoughts later this week, kind of looking back and looking ahead. Also got a chance to chat with Brett Yormark a little bit pregame, and so not this week, but in the coming weeks, he's got some stuff that he's going to be talking about with a new little mission that the Big 12 has taken on. So excited to be able to kind of get that news out when it comes out. I don't think I'll get to break it. I don't think I'm that important, but he promised me I'd get to be one of the first to know, because I have a special connection to this big news coming up. So
it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool stuff. Very excited for that to get out and into the ether here in the coming weeks, and excited to see how people respond to what the Big 12 has planned. It's going to be pretty cool, I think.
Yeah.
But I think that's going to do it for this episode of Frogs Insider. We'll be back later this week to preview TCU's game against Nichols.
If we can find anybody that covers Nichols, that's what
we'll find a way.
You know somebody. Yeah, I got a couple people. We'll figure it out.
We'll find a way to preview Nichols. They do have a former Horned Frog on their roster that we're going to want to talk about a little bit. I'll do another mailbag this week as well, so look for that tweet to get some questions out. If you're a member of the board, I'll throw another thread up there so you can ask some questions and get some mailbag stuff going on. But yeah, you can look for that episode coming up later this week. Melissa, anything else?
Truby's first game Tuesday. Tuesday. So, flag football season has officially begun for me. So, if TCU cannot get it done on the field, don't worry. Hopefully St. Francis will for you guys.
This will just become a St. Francis Truby's podcast here in the near future.
We're going to get that. Whatever it takes.
Get all the advanced analytics from hopefully a Truby's win on Tuesday as well.
Yeah. I guarantee we'll be ready to play emotionally. I guarantee
that. There you go. They're going to be fired up. They're going to be fired up. So for Melissa Treebwasser, I'm Jamie Plunkett. This has been the Frogs Insider Podcast. Be sure that you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe on that YouTube channel as well, where we've got so much content. We've got all the press conferences, player interviews, all this other stuff going on up there. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Leave us a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your shows, so that we can continue to put the good word out to all the TCU fans who want to hear this content. Until next time, go Frogs.
Go Frogs.